Hello, thank you so much, Jill, and thank you, Guild members. In June Leaf's breakout solo exhibition, Street Dreams, in 1968 at Alan Frumpkin Gallery in New York, she presented several dioramas with gyrating circus performers and a life-size stage set titled Ascension of Pig Lady. Street Dreams also featured the life-size soft sculpture, The Horse, on a rolling platform. Iterations of this horse reappear throughout Leaf's drawings and paintings. Pushed around by a cast of fictional characters closely resembling the rolling stage props of 19th century theater and opera production. Reviewing Street Dreams, Hilton Kramer wrote in the New York Times, "Indeed, theater is the keynote, for many of Miss Leaf's separate works are, in fact, either constructed as stage sets or consist of figures out of an imaginary performance. For Ms. Leaf, the theater is a metaphor of the interior life, the life of the mind overcome by its own fantasies." In the heyday of minimalism and conceptual art, embracing theatricality was a fairly radical gesture for visual arts in New York. In summer 1967, Art Forum published Michael Fried's watershed anti-theatrical diatribe, Art and Objecthood, which argued that in order to be avant-garde, visual art must overcome the impurity and hybridity of theater. The ambiguity between fine art and theater, already fully apparent in Street Dreams, would become a recurrent theme throughout Leaf's career and a pivotal factor in her critical reception. Although Leaf posed on top of the horse for photos, she never used her tableau as the backdrop for staged performances, as Jim Dine, Alison Knowles, Robert Rauschenberg, or Daniel Sperry had done in this late 1950s, 1960s context. Leafs were exhibition pieces that provided their own cast of characters and did not require live ones. Leaf expanded the options for how autonomous art objects might operate in an art gallery, but did not abandon or dissolve that category altogether. Although she never explicitly addressed the distinctions among fine art, theater, and theatricality, they are central to the ways in which her work has been at times celebrated and at times dismissed. Perhaps because Leaf's earliest exhibited works appear at first glance to be carnivalesque rather than conceptual, and goofy rather than political, she was overlooked by the art historians who only years later embraced the critical edge in theatrically oriented installation work of this era. Gender also played a role. For decades, the tableau of Leaf's male contemporaries, such as Edward Kienholz and Claes Oldenburg, were more widely exhibited and written about than those of Leaf, Marisol Escobar, or Nikita Sanfal. Nonetheless, all of these artists contributed to the development of stage and theater strategies as modes of aesthetic engagement in art galleries. Performance was part of Leaf's life from a young age. She aspired to be a dancer, but felt she was too tall, and by age 17, that her feet were too big. Still, she explained, "I think of myself as a dancer making art." At age 16, she was deeply impacted by a performance she attended by the mime and visual artist Angna Enters, explaining, "She stood up on the stage and she drew and she danced, and I looked at her and said, that's what I'm going to do." And it's true, except she was committed to performance. I come to it late. I tried to think I wasn't a performer, I was a painter. We find some of Leaf's earliest theatrical references in her miniature dioramas populated with marionette-like figures. They emerged from a childhood experience at the arcades and amusements along Chicago's Navy Pier. Leaf described, "In one of the arcades, I first saw a box with mirrors and a claw that comes down. You put a penny in and maybe you got a prize. I put a penny in the box and an arm came down. I almost fainted and I thought, life, treasure, life, treasure. I was like a moth drawn to a flame. Like her germinal experience with the disembodied arm in the mirrored box on the Navy Pier, Leaf was drawn to the enclosed space of the stage for its ability to contain the chaos of life without necessarily bringing order to it. Recalling a visit to the 17th century Dutch genre paintings at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Leaf commented, "I understood more why I was drawn to these calm and peaceful scenes. The exterior is peaceful, and somehow I could deposit my earthquake-feeling women into rooms of order and calm." Galleries and museums generally present Leaf's works in frames and vitrines according to standard practice in the display of fine art. However, throughout her life, the majority of Leaf's work lived in the organic, casual environment of her studios in Mabu, Nova Scotia, and New York City. In constantly shifting arrangements, her works were components in an immersive, living, total work of art. She perpetually rearranged complete and in-progress works in configurations resembling a puppet theater, dollhouse, or stage prop depot. Boxes throughout her studio contained metal figurines, some of which she conceived as belonging to a single sprawling epic, often featuring a man and a woman. She would try out various arrangements in front of larger paintings illuminated by a harsh, raking shop light that cast dramatic shadows. Although Leaf did not develop fully fledged narratives in these tableaux, they refer to general human archetypes and relations. As she arranged the figures in front of various drawings, she said things like, "She goes with him. He entices her with a feather." Or, giggling gleefully, she would exclaim, "Oh, he's really alive." Then the next day, you'd walk into her studio to find she'd completely rearranged the elements. She said, "I don't use dreams. My dreams use me. I'm really a choreographer. First, I have to learn the dances of these individual characters, like in a novel. I have to get to know them until I think I am them. And the next day, I realize I'm now the choreographer and I know the dances of both sides." "It's very simple," she said. "I just have to make things move, that's all. Or I just want you to feel that they can move. It's like I animate them. I make them move, breathe, get up, talk back to me." End quote. This haptic quality is key, not just movement, but ensuring that her works would evoke in the viewer a feeling of movement simulated in our mind and body. I had the honor of working with June for several years on the exhibition. Sadly, she died of stomach cancer at age 94, just months before it opened. Given how much of the work is kinetic and how instrumental she was in activating it with her own hands, my co-curators and I knew that in Leaf's absence, we had to be creative in bringing the work to life for our visitors. Our first move was to use excerpts from Leaf's writings and interviews as the sole voice on the wall labels, rather than our own interpretation. All three venues also hosted film screenings and included video documentation of Leaf activating her sculptures. With Oberlin's world-class performing arts programs, the Allen was particularly well-positioned to take up the challenge of bringing her works to life. Most museums develop exhibition-related performances and public programs in response to an exhibition. My curatorial practice is slightly less conventional because it developed out of my background in performance studies, following my doctoral and postdoc research on theater set design. I gravitate towards artists and artworks that engage with performativity, camp, and theatricality. As a result, my exhibitions often center live performance not as an add-on, but as a central strategy for conveying artists' visions. Whereas art historical scholarship and museum wall labels use text to interpret art, visual art is not primarily textual, And so I've never felt that text is an effective medium for elucidating it. Visual art is spatial and temporal, and so performance is inherently better suited as an interpretive method. Oberlin dance professor Ann Cooper Albright spent this past semester working with her students to imagine what it would mean to fulfill June's wish to be a dancer. The students, now at the age June was when she abandoned dance, took her works as choreographic cues to direct the movement of their bodies. Having come out of a milieu not unlike June's, Anne was the perfect partner in this endeavor and even assisted me in placing the sculpture in the gallery with a sense of dynamism and play. For a special event last month, Anne and her students used movement to help our visitors think about how Leaf's sculptures and utterances might be cues to act and think in new ways about how we relate to our bodies and each other. Other dance classes of Anne's will be back throughout the semester to continue exploring the relationship between June's sculpture and embodiment. Close looking at every hand and posture in Leaf's sculptures is a masterclass in the range of expressivity of human gesture, something Leaf spent more than 80 years studying. This was especially instructive for young dancers who are just developing their repertoire of movement. Meanwhile, in the conservatory, student composers have written vocal chamber works based on the exhibition, making use of Leaf's own words. There was a risk in developing such a robust component of the exhibition without the artist's approval and virtually without precedent during her lifetime. As I mentioned, her works were meant to be operated by her, but were never intended to serve as backdrops for staged performances. However, Leaf's collaborators, friends, and representatives from her estate and foundation who attended the dance activation were moved to see how deeply the students understood Leaf's eccentricity, her humor, and her aesthetic. In part, this is because the student engagements began not in the classroom, but through sustained in-person study of Leaf's work and her writings. Oberlin students are also uniquely capable of pulling this off through their talent, sincerity, and commitment to honoring unconventional artistic practices. In Leaf's dioramas, metal sculpture, and two-dimensional work, as in theater and opera, the proscenium is a metaphysical device, removed from literal mimetic representation. The studious orthogonal lines in this work, Arcade Women, produce a space that is steep and artificially raked. It's not the space of everyday life, but of a stage, condensed and slanted for an audience's ease of viewing. In this drawing, Leaf placed the figures in dramatic gestures on what appears to be a revolving stage, a common device in theater and opera. Her text reads, "The secret is not drawing, but dance." And below the image of lifeless bodies, he's only sleeping. Leaf's text likens her hand and drawing implement to a dancer's feet, while the limp figures who might appear to be dead are perhaps only play acting. Theater is an art of repetition, of continual rehearsals and performances, each chipping away at the notion of singularity, and at the same time, asserting every repetition of a script as singular. Describing her studio practice, Leaf said, "You're supposed to approach the thing you're making as though you've never made anything before. You're an absolute beginner. You have to start all over again. You can't say, oh, I've established something, now I'll just go from there. No, you have to wipe the slate 100% clean. You are back in the first day of art class." Performance necessitates this continual return to the beginning, this perpetual repetition. In 2002, in Leaf's New York studio, she created a miniature stage with a backlit scrim and wire figures, commenting, "I always reinvent something. By making this, I realized I reinvented the excitement of theater, but it won't be like other theaters. It will be the way I need to make a theater now. Thank you.